It's true. Across the globe, women aren't as prosperous as men. Gender inequality is a pressing moral issue, but we forget it has massive economic implications. If you were to put all of the women who don't have access to formal financial services in one place, they would make up the third largest country in the world. That means an entire population without bank accounts, credit cards, or other tools you and I likely benefit from daily. Prosperity for women starts with inclusive policies, products, and people around the globe, and the investment to make it happen. Welcome to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. My name is Sonia Kelly, and I lead Women's World Banking's proprietary research division. Join me as I speak with changemakers around the globe to deconstruct the social and economic exclusion women face. We'll discover new evidence together and drive action to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Because a leg up isn't a handout, it's a global game changer. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, which is now streaming on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sonia Kelly. If you are listening on YouTube, you'll be able to find additional insights and resources that are linked in the description of the video below. Before we get started, I'd like to give a special shout out to the sponsor of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, which is Ernst & Young LLP. EY is a global leader working across assurance, consulting, law, strategy, tax, and transactions. EY teams ask better questions to find new answers for the complex issues facing our world today. You can visit their website at ey.com to explore their latest insights and services. Now let's jump into the show. So for those who aren't familiar, Fintech, which is what we're talking about today, is the application of technology to financial institutions. And today's examples include mobile banking, digital payment systems, cryptocurrency, other app-based financial services access and use, and we'll be talking about ones beyond that too. I want to jump right into an example of a fintech company so that you have some context for our discussion. So I want to talk about a company that won our Fintech Innovation Challenge last year in 2023, and that company is Paycode. Now, Paycode is an Africa-based biometric digital identity and payments technology company, and it simplifies financial transactions in rural areas, especially by utilizing tablet scanning technology and people's fingerprints to issue them with smart cards in just a few minutes. Now, with these cards, individuals are able to use these cards and point of sale technology or point of system technology to conduct financial transactions, even offline. There are funds that are stored on the card, not in a bank, which enables offline transactions, which is really, really good if you live in a place with low connectivity. So let's look at one of Paycode's customers in Zambia, and her name is Lisa. You can actually find all of this on their website if you want to learn more about Lisa. Lisa is a farmer in Zambia, and she was just one of the almost 1 billion women in the world without a form of identification, and one of about a billion women in the world that don't have adequate financial services. She lives in deeply rural Zambia, meaning that she didn't have a form of ID, she didn't have a bank account, and even if she did, she would not have been able to afford the fees that came with traditional banking. There's no mobile connectivity in her area, so mobile money is not an option for her, and that's money that you might use using your cell phone through the mobile network operator. You may have heard of mobile money services like M-Pesa, or others from Airtel or Orange or other companies. So instead, Lisa was keeping the money that she earned from selling her produce at home, which would sometimes get stolen. In fact, there's research that shows that money kept in cash, 22% of it is lost annually compared to money that's kept in a formal financial institution. So this company, Paycode, came into Zambia and was able to utilize Lisa's fingerprints and issue her a smart card that functioned as a debit and credit card, also functioned as a payment channel, also functioned as a checking and savings account and a lot more. And now she's able to control her finances with the help of something that everyone has, which is a fingerprint, bypassing the need for an ID. And while her community doesn't have internet connectivity, the agent she works with can make transactions using her card. And this is validated with a confirmation that can be delivered via Bluetooth to her phone if internet connectivity does come. And then the transactions reconcile once the agent gets back online. So, like I said, you can check out Lisa's story and others on the Paycode website. Now, for Lisa and others, fintech solves a number of problems, and those include time poverty. We know that women spend more time at home than men, focusing on domestic tasks and dependent care. There's also income challenges that women have, and so services need to be inexpensive. They can't have like a really high touch with like a teller that's paid a lot of money, for example. Women also have limitations to mobility. They're less likely to go far from their homes. So they have to be able to access their financial services nearby, which sometimes means in the palm of their hand. Women are more likely to be thin file customers, customers that don't have a lot of information that's out there about them. And that's always a challenge, especially for getting credit. And then there's unconscious human bias at play as well. And fintech solves some of the unconscious human bias challenges by applying machine learning or artificial intelligence. So this is all exciting, but the fintech industry is shockingly male dominated. Let me give you some numbers here. Forbes says that only 30% of the fintech workforce is made up of women, and only 8% of fintech leadership roles are held by women. And stunningly, only 1.5% of fintech founders are women, and they receive only 1% of funding. So those numbers that I just shared got lower and lower and lower and lower to receiving only 1% of funding. And we can't ignore the press that fintech companies are also getting as part of the broader tech industry. Right now, we're hearing words again like bubble and layoffs and overvalued. And so fintech has a crisis of women's leadership and also maybe approaching an inflection point as well. I think that's enough context from me. Let me introduce our guest for today. Nicole Casperson began her career in journalism. She was focusing on finance and noticed the lack of diverse female voices. And she's now the founder and CEO of Fintech is Femme, which is a media company delivering biweekly newsletters highlighting fintech news, analysis, and strategies, ensuring diverse voices have a platform. She's a regular Forbes contributor on fintech inclusion. She also teaches financial management at the Parsons School of Design, and she's a sought after speaker, having presented at Money 2020 and the Women's World Banking Summit in Mumbai. And that was the Making Finance Work for Women Summit, in fact, and that's where I first met her. She's recognized as an inspiring woman in fintech by NYC Fintech Women, and Nicole is working on her first book, Fintech Feminists. Welcome, Nicole. Nicole, I'm a loyal reader of your newsletter too. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, what an introduction. Way to go. And thank you so much, Sonia, for having me. And so excited to be here. I always love working and collaborating with Women's World Banking and being involved in the work you do. So thank you for having this
Yeah,
podcast and inviting me.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to start by asking you a little bit about your background before we jump into the more kind of heavy hitting questions. I mentioned in your bio that you noticed the lack of diverse female voices in your industry, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how it led you to what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, my background is in journalism. I grew up as a finance reporter at a number of different trade publications. And over the years, I really found that not only were the industries that I was writing about, financial services, largely male dominated, but so were the newsrooms I was sitting in. The last newsroom being I was the only woman, person of color, and person under the age of 30 at the time in the newsroom, which really shaped the type of stories and the type of narrative we were sharing and telling, right? And when you create news stories that only cater to one kind of person, that perpetuates a cycle of financial services catering their products to only one type of person, i.e., not the global majority, right? So I founded Fintech is Femme. I left my traditional reporting trajectory to start Fintech is Femme because I learned over the years that the newsroom was actually the direct source for why so many women had false narratives around money and business kind of ingrained into our psyches, right? We're told women don't like to invest, or you've heard these silly stories, right? Or women aren't good with at math, or women just don't care about managing money. While we know literally none of those are true and completely inaccurate narratives, there's when you see it in the news all the time, it becomes normalized to us, to our culture. So I knew I needed to step in and say, you know what, women in financial services, there are so many inspiring women building in this space that people do not know about. I'm a journalist. I can create a platform to where we are talking about these women and what they're building every single day. I am never bored. I am never out of news. There are so many women. There's no pipeline problem. There's no shortage of incredible women building in this space. Let me tell you, I'm crazy busy. And I have plenty to cover. And that's the market opportunity I saw. I mean, and the data is there as well. You shared all of those stats. It's the same for the news media. Women are half the global population, but represent only a quarter of media stories told. And then if you want to go down to even women's stories centered around them being showcased as business leaders, that shrinks to even 15%. And that number has not moved in a decade. So, but what women are mostly represented in news media are as homemakers, right? At 98%. Nothing wrong with that, except for it's just not an accurate picture. It's really more of a yes and situation where majority of women are not only business leaders in their homes and managing their finances, but also are the homemakers as well. So they're really doing both jobs. But anyways, so that's why I founded Fintech is Femme, because I do believe that women's stories are front page news and not saved for just the women's section or just the diversity section of a paper.
Well, and despite the fact that you are not at a lack for work and you are seeing these stories everywhere, only a small percentage of venture capital funding goes to women led startups, like at 1%
Right.
ish. So like what do you say to venture capital companies? How can they tackle this disparity and create a more equitable funding environment?
Yeah, I think media literacy is really important. It's a huge portion for why I started Fintech is Femme, because you can't be what you can't see, right? And so I really approach it in three parts. So first, we have to amplify her story. The more we amplify women's stories, the more that they're actually seen, and the more that venture capitalists, the more that people looking to fund these people can actually see that they are out there, instead of just the kind of narrow circles that maybe they live in, right? We want to diversify and expand those networks and expand those mindsets. So that really that's the power of storytelling and the power of a media platform and a newsletter. And I've seen that change happen in real time. Women have featured in my newsletter, have secured funding, right? Have spoken on my stage and gotten that first round investor. And that is huge. So I think media literacy and paying attention to who we are listening to, questioning when an article from a reputable publication only has all male sources, questioning what does that really mean? What kind of narrative are they showing me of what they truly care about when they don't take the time to diversify the type of sources and the type of startups that they're putting in front of into the news and into the world, because that's what venture capitalists are seeing. So there's one. I think a lot of that stems from you have to do an individual assessment, organize, and then that turns into policy, right? That's like the ripple effect and trajectory we want to go on. So, as an individual, what are you doing in your day to day to ensure that you are diversifying the type of media that you consume, diversifying the type of stories that you're paying attention to, right? Diversifying, what does your LinkedIn network look like? What does your friend group look like? A lot of the stories of the women featured in my upcoming book, they share just what a valuable resource social capital is when you, as one of my favorite quotes in the book from Lule de Messe, the former CEO of eToro, will say, when you're not eating rice pudding every day. when you're diversifying your palette
Hmm.
and the economic opportunity there when you can see that there's so much more global majority to be served. So that needs to happen on an individual level, especially for people that are funding these startups. They have to actively look outside of their networks. They have to be intentionally decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to not partake in pattern matching, right? Just the practice of being drawn to people like you and only wanting to fund people like you. I'm going to see the value in the fact that innovation lives in diversity but dies in silos, right? Um, and understand that the data is there to showcase that funding women and people of color and individuals that have come from these adversities and come from these diverse backgrounds is actually better for your bottom line. There is all of that. There's also the emotional aspect of it too. So, right at the end of the day, when you're funding these like early stage um, startups, it is more of you betting on the founder. So, what kind of self evaluation on an individual level can you do to ensure you're checking your own biases? Now, that you can only do so much as an individual, which then goes to the organized section of the action items we need. So once as an individual, you've done as much work to make sure your network is diverse and your expansion and your eyeballs are on a wide breadth of humans. How are you bringing that same level and organizing with people in your community? Because without community and organizing together, nothing's going to happen, because we have to take those individual pieces and it has to create policy, whether that's a policy at your company, at your corporation, whether that's a policy at your venture capital firm, whether that's something as far as California Governor Gavin Newsom, right, signed Senate Bill 54, the Fair Investment Practices by Investment Advisors, which is like a new diversity reporting law that requires VC companies with ties to California to annually report the demographic information of the founding team members at their invested companies, right? That type of transparency, that's the kind of policies we want, because that law is going to make that data incredibly transparent for the inequitable funding distribution. And what happens in California is kind of a benchmark state, right? Where that can be expanded on a national level. How do we get those kind of policies in place? You have to work as an individual, organize as a community, and then advocate for policy and policy change, whether in the congressional level, like that law in California, or at a corporate level. So those are the three steps I would take.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
those are all things that, like, any individual listening to this podcast can do. They can educate themselves so that they can be aware of their own biases when it comes to decisions they're making, in their sphere of influence, and then engage with a community that's actively exploring these topics. I really like that. It's quite actionable.
Yeah. Like to keep it actionable.
Yeah. I've noticed that about you. Um, I wanna talk about one specific fintech product for a second, and that is wallets, because wallets have doubled in usage globally over the past 5 years. And just for those who are listening, I'm not talking about, like, the wallet you keep in your pocket, but rather a digital wallet, that you might put money into. The money might sit there in the wallet, but then you also can use it to pay. You can store value in that mobile wallet. Um, and so it's stunning to me how much usage of wallets has grown, doubled in the past 5 years. It seems like there are a number of fintech companies, a lot of fintech companies that are kind of building up around this trend. And so I wonder, especially for women in underserved markets, how can new fintech companies leverage this growth in wallets to further close the financial inclusion gap? Kind of starting with payments as an on-ramp to financial inclusion.
Yeah, I think the interesting element about wallets, and it's somewhat similar to a lot of the technological advancements happening, AI as well, which I'm sure we're going to get into, but um, it really is all about how much can we expand the digital footprint of users in these markets that we don't actually know that much about, right? Because the thing is that when you're going to, as women's world banking knows, if you're going to serve the global majority, then you're going to need to use a much different set of standards, data points, and get a little creative on those alternative data points that you're going to use to be able to provide them the financial services that they need. So I think what is interesting about wallets specifically, to your point, is that one, getting physical things is actually like harder these days than having things on a phone or an Android device, which most humans across the world have these devices. But the really interesting part to me is how can we leverage these wallets as a tool to really better understand user data and understand user behavior. What is the behavioral finance element of it? Cool, like we understand payments. What are we tracking? What data points are we tracking about those users and how they are transitioning payments over so that we can get a better picture of who they are and not some blurry, like, here are 5 data points that are going to tell me if you're good enough for a loan, right? Instead, how do we get a much clearer picture by extracting far more data points that we can because we have the advanced technology to do so, to be able to serve more people? That's where I see the um, the opportunity in that space in leveraging digital wallets. I sometimes here in the states, I like don't know what we're doing. Like I know Google's like messing around with digital wallets. They like recently got a new announcement out that frankly I haven't looked at yet, but um, in that case, it seems a little like bell and whistly. But when we think about it for markets outside of the US and markets that really need these kinds of technologies, I see a lot of that potential because even someone like the users of Paycode, right? Like huge fan of Paycode. Love that you brought them up. Gabe Ruhan is like an incredible human, the CEO of Paycode. And how do we get a digital wallet to someone like a Paycode user, right? Who physically doesn't have an ID. I see wallets almost like another extension of how can we help people that haven't historically had IDs and don't have access to these physical things leverage these these digital wallets. But we also have to have the technology to make sure that everyone has the capability to even access those.
And now, a word from our sponsor. EY applauds Women's World Banking's 45-year legacy empowering women through financial inclusion. Together, we have a common vision to build a better financial services industry, one that is stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Find out more on ey.com. Yeah, that's true. I mean, women are much less likely to have a smartphone. They're
Exactly.
much less likely to use mobile internet, something like 27% less likely to use mobile internet than men are. And so there is that, you're totally right. There's that basic infrastructure component that, we can't even talk about financial inclusion until we talk about infrastructure inclusion and digital readiness of individual consumers. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that'll happen the more we see women leading in the space, right? Because at the end of the day, our universe, because it's been largely a male dominated space, especially in the leadership and the product design, it's it's a lot of the effects that we're seeing now in the inadequacy of the financial services industry to serve women, right? Because when you have products that are designed by one kind of human, right, largely men, then that as much as they think they're building anything gender neutral, you're really not, right? Gender neutral doesn't really exist if a product or a service or a whole industry, right, is built off of a foundation of one type of person's belief or viewpoint of how it should look and what it should be like. And that's why we have these like discrepancies around women not feeling like the financial services industry sees them, acknowledges them, understands them, because the product has always been designed in one direction when we need it to be designed in multiple directions to reach as many people as possible. So high hopes. high hopes for as we see more women leading in the space
Yeah.
and building. Yes.
Yeah, we like to say that if you design for men, you are gonna reach men, but if you design for women, you're more likely to reach everyone because 'cause you're designing for the person that's less connected, that's less likely to have an ID, it's less likely to have a digital device, and you're thinking of kind of that lower bar of inclusion, when you
Right. It's
design for
basic.
women.
It's basic product inclusion. Exactly. Right. It's the same with when, it's the curb cut effect, right? Which curbs in the sidewalk were originally designed for uh disabled people, right? So folks in wheelchairs or folks that need those things, but now everyone uses the curbs in or the cuts in the sidewalks and the curbs. Women with, people with strollers, right? Even people that ride skateboards or scooters. So, or if you're like pushing anything with a wheel, those things are helpful. So when you design for the margins, you get the center for free.
I love that. You mentioned AI machine learning. We have to talk about it. We're not allowed
Obviously,
we're not allowed to not talk about it. Um,
obviously.
tell me what you're worried about. Tell me what you're excited about with AI machine learning.
Oh my goodness. So many things. One of the things I think is the most exciting part about AI. So as a finance reporter for the last decade, I can feel like an AI hipster, if you will, because I'm sure a lot of us feel this way because, AI has been around for a very long time. It's so interesting to see the way it has entered cultural consciousness now. I think I would love to get to a place, as a huge goal of my book is to get people talking about fintech as much as we're talking about AI. The things that I find very exciting about AI is its ability to expand the knowledge we have and the digital footprint we have on people, right? So the more data points, kind of similar to what I was saying about wallets, the more data points that we have on people, the clearer picture we have on who they are, the better we understand their behaviors, the better we can actually provide them with financial services. Bing, bang, boom, right? Now, thing about it is kind of twofold. On a more infrastructure scale, we have to get to a place, and I know fintech companies working on this. One is called Entropy, which is founded by an incredible woman. Her name is Nareva Danyan, and her company is really focused on making the data connectivity between large incumbent financial institutions and startup fintech companies really be able to talk to each other, right? Because as we know or may know, a large challenge of the traditional financial services slash bank and fintech collaboration is the fact that most incumbent banks weren't designed to speak nice to technology outside of their own original infrastructure. So we need that update, right? But what ends up happening is like you can have all the data points, but if it's not clean, if it's not actually like organized in a way to where it's usable, then it becomes almost more work than it is worth, and then we won't end up using that data, and it falls and forget this awesome technology that we have to do all the things that we've talked about. So I think ensuring that we have incredibly, cleaned up, thorough data that isn't, super rife with the biases that we already see in society today is a huge element. That's where some of the worry in AI, if you will, comes. So the thing about every technological or finance evolution that we've seen in our society, at least since I've been alive, is the pattern of every single one being led predominantly by men, and each evolution ending in crises, right? So bank failures, global economic disasters. We just kind of had that experience with the crypto space, and it was a new space, but at the same time, while its goal was to and is still is to be able to expand financial services to more people, and it still has that capability. Along the way, in the last few years, the listening, the voice of who is leading the conversation around cryptocurrency fell on the same people, on the same type of people, right? I.e., basically like super rich white men, right? Who didn't really care about crypto and blockchain technology's original goal, which is to serve the underserved. So because those voices largely took over that space, I mean, look what happened. We saw the same pattern in that that bro culture, if you will, really kind of lost the wind and lost the real um, the like wholesomeness and what is capable of this technology. I don't want to see the same thing happen in AI. And what's scary is that, especially in the media landscape, you're kind of already seeing it. I think we're being a little more cautious this time around because AI, I think, is just easier for people to wrap their heads around than blockchain technology, which yeah, and we're just seeing it's been around longer. Literally, it's just been around longer, so we're seeing advancements that make more sense to people. So I think a big piece of that is leaders in the space, to wrap this up with a bow, need to be very cautious of the type of researchers and the type of people leading the AI discussion that they're listening to. So let's make sure that we're not just listening to, the New York Times's list of who's in AI, which is all 12, which is a list of a dozen men. I rewrote that list for them with a dozen women in
Huh.
AI that they could be paying attention to instead, right? So that's something I want us to be really cautious of, right? Like, let's listen to, Dr. Fifi Lee, Dr. Latanya Sweeney, Dr. Daphne Kohler. Just Google incredible women in AI; they are out there, and let's
And
listen
women's
to
world
them.
banking. Google women's world banking too, because we have some
And
great resources on AI machine learning that
yeah,
you can check out on our
yeah,
website, and I'll link to them
yes.
below as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So listen to them and let's, for once, let a different group of people lead the technology revolution and lead the narrative, and let's see how things are come out differently for us.
Yeah. So let's talk about consumer protection then as like a natural follow on.
Yeah.
Women are more likely than men to say that they value privacy. Like that's a big concern of women's. And then they're also more likely to say they want to talk to a human when something goes wrong, and have a really effective, efficient redress process. So when we're thinking about the world that you've just painted a picture of, where everybody's data is clean and it's easy to make decisions about them, and we can build lots of low cost, highly scalable financial services using AI machine learning. Where does consumer protection fit into that picture, and how can women be part of that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a important part of literally everything, because I know for me as a reporter over the years, I've been pretty bored with the narrative that consumer protection and regulation stifles innovation. I actually
Mm,
think that they are not mutually exclusive. I mean, luckily, we, have some folks in our congressional, offices here in the States that recognize that. Um, but to your point, I mean, there really is no advancing these innovative technologies unless we are protecting the people that it's meant to serve. And if as long and we have to follow leaders and policy leaders in the space who care more about protecting the consumer than and less about protecting the status quo,
mm,
really.
mhm.
Um, exactly. So, like, maybe let's not dismantle the CFPB. I use an acronym. Maybe let's not dismantle the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Which is a government
Let's
institution in the US, for those
Yes,
who are listening
yes,
internationally. Mhm, yeah.
yes, and speaking to America specifically, which is what I know, in terms of regulation. But I think there's a lot of ways we can do this. I think we could be a lot more collaborative in terms of how all of the stakeholders actually work together. Um, and then there is a level of, frankly, patience that I think we could do a bit
Mhm.
better at. People get really, really excited to move fast on these technological advancements. And I get it. We do. There is like a level of urgency because the wealth gaps and the inadequacies of the financial services space are so huge. But maybe instead of moving fast and breaking things, we moved at a decent pace and protected our end consumer, which is the whole point of why we're all
Mm.
here, right? Um, so that for me comes with mostly a lot of like narrative shifts, a lot of mindset shifts in terms of seeing regulation as a true partner in this, as opposed to, oh, this thing I have to deal with because laws. It's maybe I can actually fully follow what the House Financial Services Committee is working on. What is Maxine Waters up to, right? What are these congressional humans, at least here in the States, working on? And I know that happens. I learned at Women's World Banking just how advanced other countries are compared to the US when it comes to
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
kudos. But that's for me what I would love to see more of is just the leaders in the business sector, especially in venture capital, especially um, in these prominent CEOs and leadership roles that get so much press. Imagine how powerful it would be if
Mm.
leading figures like that just went out there and said, "You know what? I'm so excited to work with regulators to protect the consumer."
Mhm.
Period. Instead
Yeah.
of, "You know what? I'm going to support someone who cares less about protecting the consumer and more about protecting my business because I need to protect my bottom line." It's
Mm.
like, so that's, I think, what we should be mindful of as business leaders is,
Mm.
once again, who are you listening to? Who are you following? And how can we get, how can we organize and get more people to be open to speaking up to protect the consumer and not the status quo?
Yeah, and I loved your point about it not being a dichotomy between consumer protection and innovation. I think that's really good
Mhm.
for us to keep in mind.
Right. Well, just those
I
comms alone would be, just to add those comms alone. Think about it. Like the messaging alone, you mentioned like women want that transparency. They want to know they're
Mhm.
being protected. Seeing business leaders, seeing Congress, seeing these figures in the space straight up saying that, that communication is what creates trust.
Yeah, I mean, that's how Amazon got huge market share, or one of the ways was people were like, "I wanna make a return." They said, "Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
there
You
you
don't
go.
even have to send it back to us. We'll just credit your account, and we'll just trust that you'll send the thing back to us." And they were very consumer centric beginning, they got huge market share. I think it's a good example. However you feel about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, it's a really good example of
Yeah.
consumer protection and consumer centric services as well. I have two more questions for you. The first is we haven't yet heard about your book, and I would love
Ah.
to give you the floor to share a little bit about it. I mean, you peppered some names in throughout the conversation, which I'm assuming are chapters in the book, but I can't wait to read it, and I'd love to hear a little sneak preview.
Of course, Sonia. So the book Fintech Feminists is essentially about women's integral role in shaping the future of our economy to be more sustainable and to be more equitable. So think about every major financial challenge that is out there. I wish I tackled every single one of them, but I did my best to tackle as many as possible, from the student loan crisis to the retirement crisis to climate change to healthcare to um, the just sheer lack of financial services catered to women. Let's just start there.
Hmm.
That's a huge portion of the book. But what really excited me the most about the book is really being able to leverage the hundreds of interviews that I've had over my years as a reporter and finally put into the history, right? Like a recorded version of history, which is what a book is, and show that women aren't only here right now building some of the most incredible and innovative companies in the fintech space that are serving the underserved, the historically ignored. They're creating those opportunities for them, building successful and profitable companies that are also sustainable and doing good. They're able to do all of that. And they do all of that in spite of a system that provides them only 1% of venture capital funding, that provides them
Hmm.
the least amount of resources. So they're scrappier than their male counterparts. They're able to lean into their vulnerability more. they showcase characteristics of great leaders in ways that you don't typically see in the news media, right?
Mm.
So a lot I have about there's I need to do a recount because there's like about 40 profiles. But when I count, women that are featured in the book or, have moments or quotes in it, it really is probably around closer to 50. I fit as many as I could in 350 pages. But you'll get to really learn the blueprint for how to succeed as an entrepreneur, as a business leader in the fintech space by
Mm.
following these women's narratives. And when you follow their narratives, not only do you get to create, kind of circling back to the top of this conversation, you as an individual, you get to start working on your own career and your own startup and the things that you want to work on and using these women's insights, including Mary Ellen Iskatarian, the president of Women's World Banking. She has such a fabulous chapter in the book. I love it so much. Can't wait for you to read it. And so you get to learn from their experiences and learn from their inspiring stories and apply it to yourself. And then you
Mm.
realize you're not so alone, right? Then step from an individual level, next step, you get to create a community, right? These women have been in your shoes, they have felt what you felt, but they've decided to do something about it and they're going to inspire you to do something about it too. So, and then on top of all of that, they're going to show you how to lead and succeed in this digital finance revolution.
Mm.
So it's just like you get a little bit of everything. You're getting research, you're getting personal story and narrative, you're getting uh, blueprints for success. Yeah, and I actually think Gabe, the Ruhan, the CEO of Paycode, one of the few men who has made a cameo in the book. But we
Also, also one of the few men who got a mention in this podcast
right.
alongside all of the women that we've discussed today.
Right, right. But you'll get stories from women, prolific women like Sally Krawcheck, the CEO and founder of Elevest, kind of the first out the gate to create
Mm.
a fintech uh, platform for women by women. You're just trailblazing figures like Angel Rich, who's the founder and CEO of Credit Rich, and and is the first woman with a Black-owned neobank, which is just huge milestones. So
Mm.
not only are women here right now building these incredible things, but I also take a moment to make sure that we honor the women of the past. So there have been so many women that have really shaped the digital finance infrastructure that their stories often get buried and we don't often hear about them in our history books. I wanted to make sure that before you meet, 40 to 50 trailblazing figures, you knew who built the rails of our financial services and our technology infrastructure to begin with. And a lot of them are trailblazing, incredible women in our history. Women like Maggie Walker, who was the first woman to own and operate a Black-owned bank in America. Um,
Mm.
Women like Grace Hopper, right, who literally built the coding infrastructure um, that banks run on today. So there's Ada Lovelace, right, is like literally our America's first coder. So the next time women listening to this, the next time if you think that this space isn't for you, honey, we built it. We built this space. Okay? It's just along the way our voices got buried, but we're taking it back. So and that's what the book does in many ways. So excited for you to read it and I think you'll really love it.
I can't wait. And we'll put a link in the chat below on the YouTube page for a link to pre-order the book for those of you who are listening. And okay, so I have one last question,
Okay.
which is considering the rapid changes in the fintech landscape. I mean, it's moving so quickly. What kinds of steps, and let's just stick to like one or two steps should industry leaders take to ensure that inclusion remains at the forefront of innovation and growth?
Mm, I think Uh, one of my other favorite quotes from my book comes from Sarah Levy, and she's the CEO of Betterment, one of the largest independent investment platforms here in the States. And she really always says in the book, what gets measured gets done. So at the end of the day, Yes, we need the individual. Yes, we need the community. We need the policy. But as leaders, you have to intentionally put measurements in place.
Mm,
Because at the end of the day, if you don't set a there is if you don't set a target, if you don't set a goal, then how are you supposed to hit something that you don't even put into place to measure?
mm,
That I think would be the number one step is to get ridiculously intentional about it. Know that this isn't like some subsection of your company that is a nice to have and really good for when Women's History Month and all these months come up, but instead is an integral role of your business foundation. Once you see that at the end of the day, if you prioritize inclusion and diverse perspectives in your business, particularly from the beginning, I've spoken to industry leaders and like startup CEOs who are like, I'll prioritize diversity and inclusion after the first 3 years. I'm like, oh, no, no, no. It's just going to
mhm,
get harder from there. I'm going to need you to focus on it at the gate. Who is your co founder? Who are the first 10 hires? If you were to
mhm,
ask someone like Serena Williams, who is Serena Williams and also an investor through Serena Ventures, she specifically has said one of her first things she looks at from a founder is who are your first 10 hires and is it a diverse roster? Because if
mm,
it's not, then I don't think the product you're creating is going to really resonate with a lot of people
mm,
because how could it if the leaders in the space don't represent the experiences of the audience that you're after or the consumer that you're after.
mm.
So I would start there. What gets measured gets done.
That's great. That's a different direction than I thought you were gonna go, and probably more meaningful because I thought you were gonna say, like, "Innovate," and, well, like, something the buzz all the buzzwords, but getting back to basics and saying, "Set a target, collect the data, and measure your progress against that target. Report it to the board, report it to your investors." Creates accountability and also forces inclusivity in a way that's, as you said, like, just baked into the fabric of the institution. That's great.
Exactly, exactly. And when you do that, what's so important too, and I talk about a bit in my book is, we got to get the women leaders in these spaces out of these silos.
Mm,
Um, it is not as someone who's been in those positions of being the only in the room that is not a fun place to be. And so for women, wanting to take initiative, if you any t- and another great quote from my book from Asia Bradley, an angel, a super angel investor, but she says if anytime she sees herself as the only woman in the room, she makes sure she changes it,
mm,
whatever that takes. Who does she got to talk to? What boss? Who does she have to hire? Because operating in silos is not how we as women grow and expand and get better. We have to support each other unequivocally, like no questions asked, fund each other's businesses, amplify each other's careers. For me, it's writing. I use the Fintech is Fun platform to write as many stories as I can every week about women leading in this space. Um, so that's the other element is just make sure you're not operating in a silo and surround yourself with incredible women in these spaces because there are so many. And if you don't know any, come read my book, read my newsletter. You'll be introduced to new ones every week.
Thanks, Nicole, and yeah, I would highly recommend the newsletter. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I've got some great nuggets that are coming out of this, that I can't wait to share with people tonight around the dinner table, honestly. This is, like,
Ah,
practical
cool.
advice and also, like, good insights on the industry. So thank you.
Ah, yes. No, thank you. I want to be at your dinner table. So
It's a good one. It's a good one.
next year in Mumbai,
That's
well,
right, that's right.
exactly. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I'm so grateful to Nicole for joining us. Like I said, I'm coming away with just some really um, practical ways that are not scary or intimidating. Practical ways that I, as an individual, can think about how to advance women in leadership, how to consider women customers more intelligently and intentionally. And so I hope you're coming away inspired too. If you work for a fintech, you can actually take a 6-minute quiz that we have online on Women's World Banking's website. It's called the Fintech Diversity Scorecard. You can just search for that. You can take a 6-minute quiz to find out how you're doing, and whether you're doing enough to make a difference. You can also stay on the lookout for Nicole's book, Fintech Feminists, which is coming out in October. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon.com. We'll put the link in the chat below, if you're looking on YouTube. And if you found today's discussion valuable, please, please, please don't forget to subscribe, to rate us, to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We're kind of new on all the platforms. It's a risk because we diversified our platforms, and it means we catch fewer people on each one, even though we're growing quickly. And your feedback really matters in this time in the development in our podcast. So please, please let us know what you think and help us to bring you more content that resonates with you. You can stay engaged, stay informed, and I look forward to connecting with you in our next episode on September 19th. Thank you so much.